It should have been the happiest day of my life. My engagement party was in full swing. The backyard was decorated with twinkling lights, and the air smelled like roses and grilled food. My name is Laura Perez, and I'm 29 years old. My fiancé, David, was chatting with my cousins, his smile as bright as the summer sun. I felt a flutter of excitement in my chest, a feeling I thought would last forever. My family was all there, aunts, uncles, cousins, and, of course, my parents. My mom, always the gracious hostess, weaved through the crowd, making sure everyone had a drink and a canopy. She approached me with a warm smile and held out a glass of red wine. "For my beautiful bride-to-be," she said, her eyes sparkling. I took the glass, but as I brought it to my nose, a strange, almost chemical smell assaulted my senses. It wasn't the rich, fruity aroma of a good red wine. This was something else, something unsettling. I frowned, trying to place the scent, but I couldn't. It was like nothing I had ever smelled before. My instinct screamed at me that something was wrong. Very wrong. This was supposed to be my perfect day, a celebration of love and new beginnings. But a dark shadow had fallen over it, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. The engagement party was being held at my parents' house, the same house I grew up in. It was a sprawling, Spanish-style home with a huge backyard, perfect for a celebration. Strings of fairy lights crisscrossed overhead, casting a warm, magical glow on the scene. Tables draped in white linen were scattered around the lawn, laden with appetizers and drinks. A small band played soft music in the corner, adding to the festive atmosphere. My family had pulled out all the stops. They wanted this to be a memorable occasion, a picture-perfect start to my new life with David. Little did I know how truly memorable it would become, but not in the way anyone intended. Among the guests were my parents, Ricardo and Isabella Perez, my younger sister Sofia, my aunt and uncle, Maria and Javier, and several cousins. My parents beamed with pride, their faces radiating happiness. Sofia, who was always up for a good time, was laughing and joking with her friends. She caught my eye and gave me a big wink. I smiled back, trying to ignore the unsettling feeling that lingered in the pit of my stomach. David's family was there, too. His parents, John and Emily, were warm and welcoming. I had always felt comfortable around them, like they were already my own family. They seemed genuinely happy for David and me, and their presence helped to ease some of my anxiety. But even their kindness couldn't completely dispel the sense of dread that was slowly creeping over me. The red wine. It sat in my hand, a dark, swirling liquid under the fairy lights. I swirled the glass, trying to discern if I was simply being paranoid. Maybe it was just a cheap bottle, or maybe my senses were heightened by the excitement of the day. But the smell, it was still there, faint but unmistakable. It reminded me of cleaning fluid, or something equally unpleasant. My mom, Isabella, was watching me expectantly. She had such a hopeful look on her face. I couldn't bring myself to tell her that the wine smelled off. She had worked so hard to make this day perfect. "It looks delicious, Mom," I said, forcing a smile. "Of course, it is, Mija," she replied, her eyes twinkling. "Only the best for my daughter on her special day." She squeezed my hand and moved on to greet other guests. I took a small sip, bracing myself for the taste. It was even worse than the smell. A bitter, metallic tang assaulted my tongue. I quickly swallowed, trying not to gag. This was definitely not right. Something was terribly wrong with this wine. It was not just bad, it was dangerous. I needed to do something, but what? And how could I do it without causing a scene or upsetting my mother? The thought of drinking any more of it made me want to throw up. My eyes darted around, searching for a solution, a way out of this predicament. Sophia was standing nearby, laughing with some friends. She had a glass of wine in her hand, a normal-looking glass of red wine. An idea, reckless and desperate, formed in my mind. It was risky, but it was the only thing I could think of in the moment. I casually strolled over to Sophia, feigning interest in her conversation. As I got closer, I bumped into her. "Oops, sorry," I said, my voice a little too high-pitched. Sophia smiled. "No problem, Laura. Everything okay?" "Yeah, fine," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant. "Just clumsy, I guess." In that brief moment, while she was distracted by my apology, I swiftly swapped our glasses. The whole thing took less than a second. I hoped no one had noticed. I walked away, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt a wave of guilt wash over me. What had I just done? I had just given my sister a glass of potentially poisoned wine. But what choice did I have? It was her or me. I tried to convince myself that I had done the right thing, the only thing I could do. But the gnawing feeling of unease remained. I watched Sophia from across the yard, a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. I hoped, with every fiber of my being, that I hadn't just made a terrible mistake. I watched Sophia, my heart pounding in my chest. She took a sip of the wine, her expression unchanged. She continued chatting with her friends, seemingly unaffected. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe the wine wasn't as dangerous as I thought. Maybe I had overreacted. But then, her laughter stopped abruptly. Her eyes widened, and she clutched at her throat. She stumbled backward, knocking over a nearby table. Glasses shattered, sending shards of glass scattering across the lawn. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Sophia collapsed. The world seemed to slow down. The music faded into a dull hum. All I could see was my sister, lying motionless on the ground. Panic seized me, a cold, paralyzing wave that washed over my entire body. I screamed her name, but my voice was lost in the chaos. People rushed to her side, their faces etched with concern. My parents pushed their way through the crowd, their eyes filled with horror. David grabbed my hand, his grip tight. "What happened?" he asked, his voice trembling. I couldn't speak. I could only point to the glass of wine that lay shattered beside Sophia. The glass that had been meant for me. The glass that now held the key to a nightmare I couldn't even begin to comprehend. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The wine wasn't just bad, it was poison. And it was meant for me. The ambulance arrived quickly, sirens blaring, cutting through the shocked silence that had fallen over the party. Paramedics rushed to Sophia's side, their movements swift and efficient. They checked her vitals, administered oxygen, and loaded her onto a stretcher. My parents followed closely behind, their faces pale and strained. David stayed with me, his arm around my shoulders, offering silent support. "We need to go to the hospital," he said softly. I nodded, unable to speak. The guilt was crushing me. I had traded my life for hers, and now my sister was fighting for her life because of me. At the hospital, we waited anxiously in the emergency room. Doctors and nurses bustled around, their faces grim. My parents were frantic, demanding answers. The initial tests came back inconclusive. They couldn't determine what had caused Sophia's collapse. They suspected some kind of poisoning, but they couldn't identify the substance. As the hours passed, suspicion began to creep in. The police arrived, asking questions. They interviewed everyone who had been at the party. They took samples of the wine for testing. Something wasn't adding up. The doctors couldn't explain Sophia's symptoms, and the police couldn't find any obvious cause. But I knew the truth. I knew that the wine was the key. And I knew that someone had deliberately poisoned it. But who? And why? The answers were hidden somewhere within my family, a dark secret waiting to be uncovered. Sleep evaded me that night. I replayed the events of the party in my mind, searching for clues, for anything that might explain what had happened. Then I remembered something. A conversation I had overheard a few weeks before the engagement party. My parents were talking in the kitchen, their voices hushed. "It has to be done, Ricardo," my mother had said, her voice tight with anxiety. "We don't have a choice. We're going to lose everything." "I know, Isabella," my father had replied, his voice heavy with resignation. "But Laura, she's our daughter. It's for the best, for all of us," my mother had insisted. "Think of the future, the stability. She'll be taken care of." I hadn't understood what they were talking about at the time. I had dismissed it as just another one of their financial worries. My parents had been struggling for years, their business teetering on the brink of collapse. But now, their words took on a sinister new meaning. They weren't just talking about money. They were talking about me. About my future. About sacrificing me for their own gain. Another memory surfaced. A few days before the party, I had seen my mother talking to a man I didn't recognize. They were standing in the garden, their voices low and conspiratorial. The man had handed her a small package, which she had quickly concealed in her purse. I had assumed it was a gift for the party. But now, I knew better. It was the poison. The poison that was meant for me. The poison that had almost killed my sister. The next morning, armed with my suspicions and fragmented memories, I decided to confront my parents. I found them in the hospital waiting room, looking haggard and exhausted. "We need to talk," I said, my voice trembling but firm. They looked at me, their faces etched with worry. "Laura, now is not the time," my mother said, her voice pleading. "We need to focus on Sophia." "No, Mom," I insisted. "We need to talk about the wine. About what you did." My father's face paled. He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. "I know everything," I said, my voice rising with anger. "I know about the conversation I overheard. I know about the package you received. I know the wine was poisoned, and it was meant for me." My mother started to cry. "Laura, please," she sobbed. "You don't understand." "Then explain it to me," I demanded. "Tell me why you tried to kill me." My father sighed, his shoulders slumping. "It wasn't like that, Mija," he said, his voice weary. "We would never hurt you. We were just trying to protect you. To protect all of us." "Protect us from what?" I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "From happiness? From love? From a life of my own choosing?" He hesitated, then finally spoke. "From ruin," he said softly. "From losing everything." And then, the truth came pouring out. A truth so shocking, so unbelievable, that it shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. My father explained that their business was on the verge of collapse. They had taken out loans, made bad investments, and were drowning in debt. They had tried everything to save it, but nothing had worked. Then, they met Mr. Carlos Vargas, a wealthy and influential businessman. He was willing to invest in their company, to save them from ruin. But there was a catch. He wanted to marry me. Mr. Vargas was much older than me, almost my father's age. He was a powerful man, but he was also cold and calculating. He saw me as a business transaction, a way to secure his legacy and expand his empire. My parents knew I would never agree to marry him. I was already engaged to David, a man I loved with all my heart. So, they devised a plan. They would drug me at the engagement party, making me appear vulnerable and compliant. They would then introduce me to Mr. Vargas, hoping that he would see me as an easy target. They believed that once I was married to him, our family's financial problems would be solved. They thought they were doing what was best for everyone, even if it meant sacrificing my happiness. "We never meant to hurt you, Mija," my mother sobbed. We just wanted to save you from a life of poverty. And what about my happiness? I asked, my voice shaking with rage. What about my dreams? What about David? They had no answer. They had traded my life for money, for security. They had betrayed me in the worst possible way. Their desperation was palpable, a suffocating cloud that had hung over our family for years. The weight of their failing business had crushed them, turning them into people I barely recognized. They had always been proud, hard-working people, but the financial pressure had eroded their values, leading them down a path of desperation and deceit. It wasn't just about the money, though. There was also an element of tradition, a deeply ingrained belief that family honor and security trumped individual happiness. My parents had grown up in a different time, a time when arranged marriages were common and daughters were expected to prioritize their family's needs above their own desires. They genuinely believed they were doing what was best for me, that a life of wealth and security with Mr. Vargas would ultimately make me happier than a life of love with David but possibly facing financial struggles. They couldn't comprehend that my happiness wasn't tied to money or status, but to love, freedom, and the ability to make my own choices. They were trapped by their own beliefs, by their fear of failure, and by their misguided love for me. But their motives, however twisted, didn't excuse their actions. They had crossed a line, betraying my trust and putting my life, and Sophia's, in danger. And now, they would have to face the consequences. The police were already asking more questions, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the whole truth came out. Despite my anger and betrayal, a heavy wave of guilt washed over me. I had swapped the glasses. I had put Sophia in harm's way. Even though the wine was meant for me, my actions had directly led to her collapse. What if she didn't recover? What if she suffered permanent damage? The thought was unbearable. And then there was the fear. My own parents had tried to drug me. They had been willing to sacrifice my happiness, my life, for their own gain. How could I ever trust them again? How could I feel safe around them? They were my family, the people who were supposed to love and protect me. But they had become my enemies, their love twisted into something dark and dangerous. I was also terrified of Mr. Vargas. He was a powerful and ruthless man, and I knew he wouldn't take kindly to his plans being thwarted. What would he do to me? To my family? I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare, surrounded by people who wanted to control me, to use me for their own purposes. I needed to protect myself, to protect Sophia, and to protect David. But I didn't know how. I was alone, facing a threat that seemed insurmountable. The only thing I knew for sure was that I couldn't stay silent. I had to expose the truth, no matter the cost. But the thought of turning against my own family filled me with dread. The future was uncertain, and I was terrified of what it held. I knew I couldn't face this alone. I needed someone I could trust, someone who would believe me and help me navigate this treacherous situation. David was the obvious choice. He was my fiancé, my partner, the man I was supposed to spend the rest of my life with. I found him sitting in the hospital cafeteria, his face buried in his hands. He looked up when I approached, his eyes red and swollen. "How's Sophia?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Still unconscious," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "They're running more tests." I sat down beside him and took his hand. "David, I need to tell you something," I said, my voice trembling. "Something terrible has happened." I poured out the whole story, from the strange smell of the wine to my parents' confession. I told him about Mr. Vargas, about the arranged marriage, and about their plan to drug me. As I spoke, his expression changed from concern to disbelief to anger. When I finished, he was silent for a moment, processing everything I had said. "Laura," he said finally, his voice low and dangerous. "This is insane. Your parents, they tried to sell you off?" I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "I know," I sobbed. It's unbelievable. He wrapped his arms around me, holding me tight. We'll get through this, he said, his voice filled with determination. We'll expose them, and we'll make sure they pay for what they've done. With David by my side, I felt a flicker of hope. I wasn't alone anymore. We would face this together, and we would find a way to bring my parents to justice and protect Sophia from any further harm. David, ever the pragmatist, immediately started planning. We need evidence, he said, his brow furrowed in concentration. We need to prove what your parents did. Our first step was to discreetly search my parents' house for the remaining bottle of wine. We found it hidden in the back of their liquor cabinet, carefully concealed behind other bottles. David took it to a private lab for testing, hoping to identify the substance that had been used to drug Sophia. Next, we focused on Mr. Vargas. David, with his background in finance, started digging into his business dealings, searching for any evidence of illegal activity or coercion. He discovered that Mr. Vargas had a reputation for being ruthless and manipulative, and that he had a history of using his wealth and power to get what he wanted. We also decided to talk to some of my parents' friends and acquaintances, hoping to uncover any information about their financial struggles or their dealings with Mr. Vargas. It was a delicate process, as we didn't want to arouse suspicion or alert my parents to our investigation. As we gathered evidence, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. We discovered that my parents had been under immense pressure from Mr. Vargas, who had threatened to ruin them if they didn't comply with his demands. We also learned that my mother had been secretly meeting with him for months, discussing the details of the arrangement. The truth was slowly emerging, and it was even more shocking and disturbing than I had imagined. With the evidence mounting, David and I decided it was time for another confrontation with my parents. This time, we wouldn't be relying on accusations and suspicions. We would present them with the facts, forcing them to face the consequences of their actions. We gathered them in the living room, the same room where I had spent countless happy hours as a child. But now, the atmosphere was thick with tension and distrust. David placed the lab report on the coffee table, along with printouts of Mr. Vargas's business dealings and transcripts of interviews with their friends. We know everything, I said, my voice cold and unwavering. We know about Mr. Vargas, about his threats, and about your plan to drug me. My mother burst into tears. My father remained silent, his face pale and drawn. How could you do this to me? I asked, my voice breaking with emotion. How could you betray me like this? We didn't have a choice, my mother sobbed. We were desperate. There's always a choice, David interjected, his voice firm. You could have asked for help. You could have found another way. But you chose to sacrifice Laura for your own selfish gain. My father finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. We thought we were doing what was best, he said. We thought we were protecting you. Protecting me? I scoffed. By selling me off to a man I don't love? By poisoning me? The tension in the room was palpable, a suffocating weight that threatened to crush us all. The showdown had begun, and I knew that our lives would never be the same again. The confrontation unleashed a torrent of long-buried resentments and hidden agendas. My mother, fueled by years of suppressed anger and frustration, turned on my father. It's always been about you, Ricardo, she screamed. Your pride, your ambition. You dragged us into this mess, and now you expect me to clean it up. My father, usually a stoic and reserved man, finally lost his composure. I did it for us, Isabella, he shouted back. For our family. You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to sell our daughter to that monster? Their argument escalated, revealing a marriage riddled with bitterness and regret. They blamed each other for their financial woes, for their broken dreams, and for the desperate choices they had made. I watched in disbelief as my parents, the people I had always looked up to, tore each other apart, revealing the ugly truth that had been hidden beneath the surface for so long. Amidst the chaos, I noticed a strange look on my mother's face, a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher. It was then that she revealed a secret that shattered my perception of my family even further. The business wasn't just failing because of bad luck. My uncle, Javier, my mother's brother, had been secretly sabotaging it for years, driven by jealousy and a long-standing feud with my father. He saw Mr. Vargas's offer as a way to finally destroy my father completely. It turned out my own family was filled with snakes. Amidst the family drama, my thoughts constantly returned to Sofia. I rushed back to the hospital, desperate for news about her condition. The doctors informed me that the lab results from the wine sample had come back. It contained a potent combination of sedatives and muscle relaxants, enough to cause respiratory failure and potentially lead to brain damage. The severity of the drugging was terrifying. Sofia had been incredibly lucky to survive. She was still unconscious, but her vital signs were stable. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, but they warned that it was too early to predict the long-term effects. I sat by her bedside, holding her hand, my heart aching with guilt and fear. "I'm so sorry, Sofia," I whispered. "This is all my fault." As the days passed, Sofia slowly began to show signs of improvement. She started to move her fingers, then her toes. Eventually, she opened her eyes. At first, she was confused and disoriented, but gradually, her memory returned. When she was finally able to speak, one of the first things she said was, "Laura, what happened? Why am I here?" I hesitated, unsure how to tell her the truth. But I knew I couldn't keep it from her. I told her everything, from the poisoned wine to my parents' betrayal to Mr. Vargas's sinister plan. She listened in stunned silence, her eyes wide with disbelief. When I finished, she reached out and squeezed my hand. "It's not your fault, Laura," she said, her voice weak but firm. "You were just trying to protect yourself." With Sofia recovering, albeit slowly, the question of what to do next loomed large. David was adamant that we had to involve the authorities. "They can't get away with this, Laura," he said. "They tried to drug you, and they almost killed Sofia. They need to be held accountable." I was hesitant. The thought of turning my own parents over to the police was agonizing. But I knew David was right. Their actions were criminal, and they had to face the consequences. And what about Uncle Javier? He too played a part in this mess. We gathered all the evidence we had collected and presented it to the police. The lab report, the financial records, the witness statements, everything pointed to a conspiracy to drug me and force me into an arranged marriage. The police were shocked by the extent of the betrayal and immediately launched an investigation. It was a difficult and painful process. I had to give a statement, reliving the events of the engagement party and the subsequent revelations. My parents were arrested and charged with attempted assault and conspiracy. Mr. Vargas was also arrested on charges of coercion and fraud. Even Uncle Javier was brought in for questioning regarding the sabotage of the family business. The family was in tatters. I felt like I was betraying them, but I also knew it was the right thing to do. Justice had to be served. The fallout from my parents' actions was devastating. Our family name was dragged through the mud. Friends and acquaintances turned their backs on us. The business, already teetering on the brink of collapse, finally crumbled. We lost everything. My parents were ostracized by the community, their reputation ruined. They faced the possibility of years in prison. Our family home, the place where I had grown up, was seized by the bank. The happy memories I had of that place were now tainted by betrayal and deceit. My relationship with my parents was shattered. I couldn't forgive them for what they had done, for the danger they had put me and Sofia in, and for the lies they had told. I didn't know if we would ever be able to rebuild our relationship, if we would ever be a family again. Even my relationship with David was strained. The stress and trauma of the past few weeks had taken a toll on both of us. We were both exhausted, emotionally and mentally. I felt like I was a burden to him, that he deserved better than to be dragged into my family's mess. But amidst all the chaos and heartbreak, there was one glimmer of hope. Sophia was recovering, slowly but surely. And she was by my side, offering unwavering support and understanding. We had always been close, but this experience had forged an even stronger bond between us. We were sisters, and we would face this together, no matter what the future held. The legal proceedings were long and arduous. My parents, facing overwhelming evidence, pleaded guilty to conspiracy and attempted assault. They received a reduced sentence in exchange for their cooperation in the case against Mr. Vargas. Mr. Vargas, despite his wealth and power, was ultimately found guilty of coercion, fraud, and conspiracy. He was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, his empire crumbling around him. His reputation, once impeccable, was now tarnished forever. As for Uncle Javier, his role in the sabotage of the family business was also exposed. He faced charges of fraud and malicious destruction of property. His actions had not only destroyed my parents' business but had also torn our family apart. Justice had been served, albeit at a great cost. My parents were in prison, Mr. Vargas was behind bars, and Uncle Javier faced his own legal battles. Our family was shattered, and our lives were forever changed. While legal action provided some measure of closure, it couldn't erase the pain and betrayal I had experienced. I had to come to terms with the fact that my parents, the people I had always trusted, had been willing to sacrifice my happiness for their own selfish gain. It was a difficult and painful process, but I knew I couldn't let their actions define me. I had to move forward, to rebuild my life, and to find my own happiness, independent of my family's legacy of deceit and betrayal. The road to recovery was long and arduous, but Sophia and I were determined to rebuild our lives. Sophia continued her physical therapy, slowly regaining her strength and mobility. The doctors were amazed by her progress, attributing it to her determination and unwavering spirit. I started therapy to deal with the trauma and betrayal I had experienced. It was difficult to confront the pain and anger I felt towards my parents, but with the help of my therapist, I began to process my emotions and to find a way to forgive them, if not for their sake, then for my own. Sophia and I moved into a small apartment together, a fresh start away from the shadow of our family's past. We supported each other every step of the way, sharing our fears and our hopes, and celebrating each other's successes. I also reconnected with David, and while the road to reconciliation was not easy, our love for each other proved to be stronger than the challenges we faced. We learned to communicate better, to trust each other more deeply, and to appreciate the strength of our bond. We both found new jobs, and we started to rebuild our lives, brick by brick. It wasn't easy, but we were determined to create a future filled with happiness, love, and trust, a future that was free from the shadows of the past. We learned that family is what you make it, and that sometimes, the most important thing is to choose your own family, a family based on love, respect, and unwavering support. Looking back on everything that had happened, I realized how much I had changed. I was no longer the naive, trusting girl who had planned a perfect engagement party. I had been through hell and back, and I had emerged stronger, more resilient, and more determined to live my life on my own terms. I visited my parents in prison. It was a difficult and emotional meeting, but I needed to hear them say they were sorry. They expressed deep remorse for their actions, acknowledging the pain they had caused me and Sophia. I couldn't forgive them completely, but I started to understand their desperation and their misguided belief that they were acting in my best interest. Perhaps, one day, I would be able to forgive them fully. As for my engagement with David, we took things slowly. We had both been through so much, and we needed time to heal and to rebuild our trust. But our love for each other endured, and eventually, we decided to start planning our wedding again, this time on our own terms, without the influence of my family's expectations or traditions. I knew that our future wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges and obstacles along the way. But I also knew that we could face anything, as long as we had each other. I had learned that family isn't always blood, that true love is worth fighting for, and that happiness is a choice that I was finally ready to make. The scars from the past would always be there, but they would serve as a reminder of the strength I had found within myself, the strength to overcome adversity and to create a future filled with love, laughter, and genuine happiness. Thank you for spending your time with my story. Feel free to share your thoughts or reactions in the comments. I'd love to hear from you.